Good morning. And Mark, thank you very much. Boy, you said that 16 years. That almost knocked me back for a second. I forget sometimes how many years long this journey has been. It's been remarkable. But nothing has been more special than what my wife and I have been able to see going on here in these last few days. And I want to thank you for allowing us to be part of it. What you guys are doing together, and I mean that together, because it really, one of the overwhelming feelings that I've gotten from the last few days is that you are not here only as individuals to better yourselves. You're here really part of a community and building something as a community that is going to be incredibly special through the years. So that's very meaningful to me to be able to witness and play a small role in some way this morning. So what I want to do is I want to tell you a story. It's a very personal story. And I also want to issue a challenge to you. But I want to start with this. I want to start with two words that are really important. Two words that we hear all the time, but we don't necessarily think a whole lot about. And what I want to do is ask you to reach into your brain, wherever that place is where you keep definitions of words, and take the word success and just eliminate, for the time that we're here together, anything you've ever thought about, heard, or committed to related to that term success and what it means to be a successful person in this world. Because I want to introduce you to a new definition, which is actually the oldest definition of all. The first Webster's Dictionary was published in the year 1806, very long time ago, the same year that Lewis and Clark completed their expedition to the West, if that puts it in perspective for you. And if you wanted to know back then what it meant to be a successful person in this world, there were only 4 words that define that for you. And those words are prosperous, fortunate, happy, and kind. Now think about those last 2 for just a moment, happy and kind. I promise you, you go home this evening, pick up a dictionary off the shelf, look up the word success or successful now, and those last 2 words, happy and kind, will no longer exist in that definition. Why were those excised? When were they excised from that definition? And how has that impacted us in the long run? So if you'll take that definition, our definition, the 1806 definition of success, and just hang that up, if you will, over an imaginary banner that's going to wave over everything I'm going to share with you this morning. We're going to put another word up there. It's a word we're going to talk about this morning. The word is coach. And we see all kinds of coaches in this world. We see business coaches. We've heard a lot about the great Bill Campbell, obviously a business coach to so many people. We have athletics coaches on all different levels, and we don't always see the prettiest pictures there. But I want to take you back to the first definition of the word coach in the English language. It was all the way back in the 1500s. It was in England. And back then, a coach was a horse-drawn carriage. But it had a very specific definition. It wasn't just any old carriage. It was a horse-drawn carriage used to convey or transport a person of importance from where he or she is to where he or she wants to be, needs to be, or ought to be going. And I would make the argument all these years later that that's exactly what we ought to be doing as coaches in America today. We ought to be taking our young people, our people of importance, from where they want to be, need to be, or ought to be going. By the way, that has nothing to do with points on a scoreboard, won-loss record, or anything like that. I would make the argument that has everything to do with what I would define as the 2 most important statistics of all: lives touched and hope gained. If you will, add that to our imaginary banner as well. So we'll start with 2 words, success and coach. Mark mentioned the book Season of Life. I want to share with you a little bit about what I now call my Season of Life journey, because it's not only a book anymore, it's been all these years and it's led to so many different things across the country. But the book itself is about a man named Joe Ehrmann. Joe Ehrmann was a great football player. Back in the 1970s, he was an All-American at Syracuse University. He went on to be a first-round pick of the then Baltimore Colts and an All-Pro in the NFL. Joe was a big-time football player for many years. He was also a big-time party guy. If you wanted to know back in those days where the team party was with the Colts, where the poker game was going to be on Wednesday nights, Joe was probably your guy to check with. And the beautiful thing about Joe is he was always reaching out to pull other people in. And I was incredibly fortunate as an 11-year-old boy to be someone that Joe reached out to and pulled in. The summer of 1974, it was Joe's second year in the NFL. I became a ball boy for the Baltimore Colts. And Joe Ehrman and so many others with that team had an absolutely huge impact on my childhood and therefore my whole life because of what they did for me by caring all through those childhood years, through my teen years when I worked those summers in the Baltimore Colts training camp. I lived with, worked with, and traveled with a professional football team for all those years. The book is also about a program called Building Men for Others. And Building Men for Others is all about taking what we give as a cultural definition of what it supposedly means to be a man and tearing that down and giving you something new. So it's all about teaching boys and men how to be men of substance and impact in this world, as opposed to so many other things that we're being fed constantly. And that program starts with this concept. It starts with the idea that we have something called false masculinity in our culture. There are three pieces to it. The first is athletic ability. So at a very young age, we learn out on the ball fields and the playgrounds of America that if you can hit a baseball, shoot a basketball, throw and catch a football a little bit better than the other boys, then you're somehow lifted up and led to believe that you are somehow better than all the others. And think about the opposite of that. If you're not one of those boys that has those abilities, you're kind of left on the side. You're kind of pushed to the side. Now, I love sports my whole life, and I know you guys have too. I'm not standing up here telling you there's something wrong with having athletic ability. I'm just telling you in an absolute fact, it has absolutely nothing to do with being a man. And then you move to that second piece, you get a little older, and we learn about what we call sexual conquest. Now, I'm not talking about healthy relationships. There's nothing better in the world than a healthy relationship. I'm talking about that notch in the belt mentality. I'm talking about bringing girls and later women around you, not for anything that serves them, but to serve your own desires and needs and gratification. Again, I'm not standing up here telling you there's something wrong with enjoying things when you're in high school and college and doing what you do as a young man. But if you're going to, at the end of the day, look at yourself in the mirror and somehow define yourself by that as a man, you're going to end up with an awful lot of loneliness in the solitude that comes with the end of a day. You get a little older and the third piece kicks in, economic success. Economic success means what kind of car do you drive? What does your house look like? What zip code do you live in? How much money do you have in your bank account? All of those things that we strive for, but I can promise you if you end up trying to define yourself by them, you're going to end up in a lot of that loneliness as well. Is there something wrong with wanting good things in your life? Absolutely not. Is there something terribly bad about trying to define yourself by those things? I think that's where we might end up with a little bit of trouble. So those three pieces, athletic ability, sexual conquest, and economic success, together form this definition of false masculinity. What Building Men for Others says is we need to get rid of that concept, those definitions, and replace it with what is called strategic masculinity. And there are only two pieces to that one. The first one, and we've heard so much about it in here the last few days, is relationships. The ability to love and to be loved. What kind of brother am I? What kind of husband? What kind of father? What kind of son? What kind of teammate? What kind of classmate? What kind of citizen out in the community? The ability to connect with others. And so if I'm out there today on my way home and get hit by a truck and I'm in a hospital tonight on my deathbed, I'm going to look back over my life by this definition, and I'm not going to ask myself questions about what I did in 10th grade basketball or who I went to the high school prom with and how did that work out that night, or what did I end up with in my bank account and how does my house look today. It's going to be questions such as what kind of brother, husband, father, son, and so on. And then there's one other piece. It's called a transcendent cause. Transcendent in the sense that it's bigger and broader than your own individual hopes, dreams, and desires. Now, you can have an individual cause, you can have multiple causes. A cause can be large, it can be small, whatever might fit your life and your decisions. But again, if I'm on that same deathbed tonight, I'm going to be asking myself about that cause. Did I have something going on in my life? Did I somehow care and contribute enough so that I can look back on that now and know that hopefully there's something I left in just a little bit better place or way than the way it stood before I got there? So those are the two major pieces of building men for others: getting rid of false masculinity and replacing it with strategic masculinity. The book is also about fathers and sons. We'll get to that shortly. And I would tell you that in a strange way, it's a book about principles to literally change the world around you. Now, I know that's kind of pie in the sky stuff. I can promise you I don't say that lightly. I mean it sincerely. And I certainly have never said that about any other piece of writing that I have done. I only know that because of the experiences that have unfolded in the years since the book came out, that I've been able to witness and in some cases even share with people, and it's been absolutely amazing. I'll get to some of that in just a little bit. The strangest thing for me is that it's a book I never set out to write. Here's what happened. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. This was early 2001. And I was at my breakfast table one morning, and I was eating my cereal and having my juice, and I was reading the newspaper. For me, it was the Washington Post. And there was this small little item, just a couple paragraphs on who knows what page, D4 or something. And it said that the state of Maryland had just passed funding for the demolition of Memorial Stadium in Baltimore. Now, I was lucky not to choke on my Cheerios. That had a very strong emotional response for me because that stadium, Memorial Stadium, was my childhood home away from home. That's where the Baltimore Colts played before they moved away to Indianapolis. And so I wondered, what do I do? How do I feel about this and how do I respond to it? And I made a decision to go up to Baltimore from D.C., where I lived, and try to walk through that stadium one last time to give my own personal goodbye. And I was fortunate enough, I was able to use the writing world a little bit. An editor with the Baltimore Sun I knew was kind enough to indulge me with an assignment. I was going to do a little one-day thing, go up there, walk around the stadium, write a piece for the Baltimore Sun, the reminiscences of an old Colts ball boy all these years later. I was fortunate enough, someone from the state allowed me in. It was all locked up at that point. It was in horrible shape. But I got to walk through on a cold January morning, spent about an hour doing that. Leaving the stadium, I wondered to myself, what in the world do you write about this tired old collection of concrete and brick? I was pretty much stumped. But what I kept thinking about was not the building itself that was going away, but all the men who had filled that place with so much life. And I thought about the coaches and the players during the 10 years. They happened to coincide with the last 10 years that the Colts were in Baltimore, the 10 years I was involved in some way. By the time I got back to D.C., I had made the decision that I was going to compile a list of every guy who played for the Colts during those 10 years. It turned out to be 212 men. And I started a process, what I called dialing for Colts, because I decided what I was going to do was find as many of these men as I could and do this in-depth where they are now piece for the Baltimore Sun and for all these old Colts fans who might enjoy seeing what had happened to these guys they had cared about so much in the years past. That process, dialing for Colts, it's a very kind name that I'm giving to it. My then girlfriend, now wife Leslie, had a couple other names for it, and they weren't quite as kind. Because that little one-day story that I was going to do turned out to be about a 4-month process of dialing for Colts. I'll use another nice word and say it became a little bit of an obsession for me. And of those 212 men, I was able to find all but, I want to say, about 27, if I remember correctly. But none was more important than the 85th guy who I reconnected with. It was Joe Ehrman. At that point in 2001, I hadn't been in contact with Joe for 18 years. It was 1983 the last time we had been in contact. I was in college then. He was still playing professional football. But our first phone call in all those years, and we spent about an hour on the phone, absolutely blew me away. The Joe I found in 2001 was a minister, pastor of a very large church, about 4,000 members in Baltimore. He had started an inner city ministry called The Door, which had impacted all kinds of lives in the community that needed it very desperately. He had started a program called Mission Baltimore, all about racial reconciliation in a city that desperately needed help and hope in that area. He had started the Ronald McDonald House, the first one in Maryland, serving thousands and thousands of families through the years while sick children were being treated in hospitals in Baltimore, primarily at Johns Hopkins University Medical Center. And oh, by the way, Joe says to me at the end of this 1-hour phone call, I'm coaching a little high school football on the side as well. I was really surprised by that because of all the other things he was doing with his life. Why in the world would he be coaching high school football? And he explained to me this program that he and his friend Biff Poggi had started, a program that they called Building Men for Others. I was intrigued. I got off that phone call and I kept asking myself, this guy Joe Ehrman, I learned so much from him when I was a boy. What might I learn from him now? So I decided that summer, in August, I drove up to Baltimore to see the first summer practice of this high school football team that Biff and Joe coached. I wanted to see what they were doing. Pulled up there on a hot August morning and I saw the weirdest thing I had ever seen in sports on any level. The first thing I saw was a high school football coach standing at one end of the field with about 90 boys sitting before him in the grass in one of the end zones, about 7 or 8 coaches standing behind this coach, and the head coach, Biff Poggi, yelling out to these boys, "What is our job?" Meaning the coaches. And all the boys yelled back in unison, "To love us." "What is your job?" And the boys yelled back, "To love each other." Okay, I took all this in. First word spoken of their whole season. And I asked myself, why in the world did I waste my time coming up here? This is just going to be some pretty strange stuff. But I came to learn pretty quickly that signature exchange, whether it was Biff and the boys or Joe and the boys, really defined everything that this whole program was about. It was just as important, probably more important, than anything they would ever say about offense, defense, blocking, or tackling, or anything else. I'm going to share with you a few of the words from Biff's opening talk to the team that year, that same morning. Biff told them, "I don't care if you're big or small, huge muscles or no muscles, never even played football or star of the team. I don't care about any of that stuff. If you're here, then you're one of us, and we love you. Simple as that." Then he introduced that magical word, community. We're going to go through this whole thing as a team. We are the Gilman football community, a community. This is the only place probably in your whole life where you're going to be together and work together with a group as diverse as this. Racially, socially, economically, you name it. It's a beautiful thing to be together like this. You'll never find anything else like it in the world. Simply won't happen. So enjoy it. Make the most of this. It's yours. Now, that's some pretty touchy-feely stuff for the opening talk of a high school football team's summer camp. And I can assure you this, Joe and Biff teach a whole lot of football as well. They know a whole lot of football. They're excellent coaches. For one stretch, when I was involved there, 8 of 9 years, that Gilman football team was conference champion in the toughest conference in the state of Maryland. That team, 4 of those 9 years, was undefeated and ranked number 1 in the state of Maryland. That team, 3 of those years, was ranked in the top 20 put out by USA Today. So these guys knew a little bit about blocking and tackling, about football concepts, but they had a playbook that included concepts that I don't think there are too many playbooks in America had these. The most important concepts they taught those boys: kindness, empathy, integrity, inclusion, justice, living a life of service to others, bringing all of your talents both on and off the field. See, the way they viewed it, football was not an extracurricular activity, it was a co-curricular activity. So it was just like science, math, history, or anything else at their school. They were teachers, they were coaches, but they had a playbook, just like the teachers in the classrooms had their plan for the day, their study plans. Joe and Biff came with their plans, and it was extremely intentional. I came to realize that it was really about one thing. It all was broken down into one overlying concept. And that is the fact that we want to keep our heads and our hearts connected. See, as boys and men, we're really taught in most places, in most messages we get in our culture, that that's the exact opposite of what we want to do. It's an amazing thing. On average in the human body, the head and the heart are only about 17 inches apart. But as boys and young men, we're taught that you want to take that connection between those two, stretch it as far as you possibly can. If you're really doing things well, just sever that connection entirely and never let those two see each other again. That's the exact opposite of what Joe and Biff want to do with those boys. They want to keep those two connected and make sure you're making decisions and choices based on both. I expect greatness out of you, Joe once told the boys. And the way we measure greatness, the only way we measure greatness, is the impact you make on other people's lives. I've been a few places around the country, and I've never heard that definition taught of greatness to high school athletes before. So if you will take that definition and add it to our banner. So now we've got 3 up there, and we're going to do something with that at the end. But now we've got our own definitions, the ones we want to work with and live by, of success, coach, and greatness. How would the boys make an impact? By living with integrity. And not only when it is convenient to do so, always. By seeking justice, because justice is often hidden. By encouraging the oppressed, because they are always discouraged. Ultimately, Joe said, the boys would make the greatest overall impact on the world, would bring the most love and grace and healing to people. Think about those words for just a second. Would bring the most love, grace, and healing to people by constantly basing their thoughts and actions on one single question. What can I do for you? Not what can I do to get a bigger bank account or a bigger house, Joe told the boys. Not what can I do to get the most power or authority or a better job title. Not what can I do for me. The only question that really matters is this: how can I help you today? And that's what they talked about all season long. They elaborated on those concepts in so many different ways. Because in case you haven't noticed yet, we're training you to be different, Biff said. If we lose every game of the year, go 0-10 on the football field, as long as we try hard, I don't care. You learn these lessons, and we're 10-0 in the game of life. Now, I assure you, based on what I've already shared with you, that team was not in grave danger of actually going 0-10. But I'm just as certain that if they had, it would not have mattered one bit in the overall view of that program based on the concepts that they were teaching. It's a unique philosophy, and it leads to some incredible moments. All these years later, the one that stands out to me the most took place 4 hours before kickoff of the biggest game of the season. Gilman, their school, the Gilman Greyhounds, once a year play their arch rival McDonough. They've been playing each other for over 100 years. And they go home and away every year, and every year it's their biggest game of the year. I don't know what the McDonough boys were doing in their locker room 4 hours before the game, but here's what the Gilman Greyhounds were doing in their team meeting room at that very moment. Each senior boy on that team was standing in front of his teammates, his community, his coaches and teammates, and reading aloud from an essay, because each senior boy had been given an assignment at the beginning of that week, the beginning of McDonough week. Each senior on that team was given an assignment to write under the title, "How I Want to Be Remembered When I Die." In effect, each senior boy on that team was writing his own obituary and would then stand in front of his community and read it aloud. I can tell you, after being with them for a few years of that process, that exercise, I would make the argument to you today that if that were done in every school in America, and I don't just mean with a football team, it can be the marching band, it can be the math club, it can be boys, girls, it doesn't matter. You take these concepts and teach them for 8, 10, 12 weeks and then do this similar exercise, and I would make the argument that in 5, 10, 20 years from now, we would literally be living in a different world. Now, there's also my own personal thread to this. I touched on the fact that we would get to a father-son piece playing a major role. Here's what happened. I was tricked. You might say I was tricked. There were two unexpected twists that took place. The first was I ended up not just spending one day checking out what these guys were doing with their team. I ended up coming back because I was so moved by what they were doing. I just kept coming back for more, and ultimately I spent that whole 2001 high school football season with this team in Baltimore. The second twist was this. Even once I decided that I was going to do that, I figured I was just going to be doing it as an observer. The trick was I ended up becoming a participant. And here's how that happened. I couldn't help, after being around these men and these boys, I could not help but put myself through my own self-evaluation. I kept thinking about what they were teaching those boys, and I kept asking myself questions about my own life. Not all of them gave easy answers, but I explored all of it. I explored the concepts of false masculinity. I explored the concepts of strategic masculinity. The first thing I did was I went to that cause piece, and that was an easy one for me to check off, actually, and I have my sister Wendy to thank for that. Wendy Marx, my little sister, my only sister, and my best friend in this world. In 1989, Wendy's first year out of college, she became very sick. She had hepatitis B. She was 22 years old. She ended up within a couple weeks in a deep grade 4 coma, and we were told that she had only 24 hours to live. Wendy needed a liver transplant to save her life. That was the only way back for her. I will never forget standing over her bed during those 24 hours with that clock ticking and thinking about how unbelievably ignorant I had been my whole life up to that point about this issue. Wendy at that time was one of 787 people in our country that needed a liver transplant, one of about 18,000 people that needed a transplant of some kind. The problem wasn't the technology was there. The problem was we have a horrible shortage of donors, and we learned that in the worst possible circumstances. When I say we, I keep saying we. I had a walk in the hallway that night. It was a hospital in San Francisco. And a dear friend of mine named Carl Lewis, some of you may have heard of him, great Olympic champion. He and I were working on a book together at the time. He knew how close I was with Wendy, and he was there with us the whole time that Wendy was in the coma in the hospital. And we made a decision. We had a talk that night at 3 in the morning with that clock ticking. Carl and I took a little break from the intensive care unit, and we were walking in the hallway outside there. And we made a commitment to ourselves and to our families right then that we would work on this issue for the rest of our lives. We even said the words, with or without Wendy. We were incredibly fortunate because a donor came the very next day. We were able to work on that issue for all those years, Wendy came back in full strength. It was unbelievable to have her with us. It was incredible to watch her make this comeback from where she was, and no one had to talk her into becoming an advocate for organ donation. So Wendy, Carl, and I formed the Wendy Marx Foundation for Organ Donor Awareness, and at that point, in 2001, we had already been working on that for 11 years, traveling all over the country doing programs to promote our cause. So that was a quick check mark for me. Then I got to those relationships. And I mean, I went on and on for days and weeks studying and exploring and trying to figure some things out. Family relationships, friendships, spiritual relationship, everything you could imagine, but I kept coming back to my relationship with my dad. Now, my dad was an amazing father to me as a child, throughout my childhood. I knew that, but I certainly didn't know it from any words he said to me. I knew it through his actions. So my dad was a stoic. My dad, a man whose emotional thermometer was stuck right in the middle. No highs for him, no lows, just keep everything right in the middle, head down, lead with the head, don't have to worry about the heart, just do things that you know are right for you and your family. So there were all kinds of things that my dad and I could talk about, but there were also all kinds of things that we couldn't talk about and never did. And I just kept coming back to that as this high school football season was moving on in Baltimore. I made a decision at the end of that season because I couldn't do this anymore. I had to change something. And so I decided I was going to go up to New York, where I'm from and where my dad lived, and I was going to spend Thanksgiving weekend with my dad. Now, my dad knew I was coming, but he didn't know what was coming. And for 3 days over that weekend, my dad and I sat alone a few hours each day on the couch in his living room and had the most incredible conversations that we've ever had before. I can tell you this, next month my dad will celebrate his 86th birthday. And it's so incredible to me now to know that that conversation that started on that living room couch Thanksgiving weekend of 2001 has been going and growing ever since. It's impacted his life in incredible ways. It's impacted mine. I've seen it impact relationships of his that have nothing to do with me. I've seen it impact my dad with his wife. I've seen it impact my dad with so many other people. And that means so much to me as a son. Now, unfortunately, to show you the true impact of this, I would say the one example that just pounds it home for me, I do have to share with you the single worst thing that has ever happened in my life. It happened in 2003. Wendy, my sister, became very sick again. The same uninvited poison in her body, the hepatitis B, flared up again. It destroyed her new liver. And once again, Wendy needed a liver transplant to save her life. This is where it gets hard. Because it happened right down the street at Stanford University Medical Center. And thanks to Mark's kindness, this is the first time I've come back to this area. I never thought I would come back. But on October 28, of 2003, I held my little sister and best friend as she took her final breath in this world. Wendy was 36 years old. Now, I don't bring that up to bring us down. I can promise you, and Mark knows because we've been having this conversation now for about a year and a half, that this was very difficult for me to come here to do this, only because of the physical setting of where we are. But thanks to Leslie, my wife, and Mark's conversations, and Ronnie Lott, who visited with you yesterday, a dear friend of mine, thanks to them, I'm very thankful that I came here. Again, I don't bring it up to bring us down. I bring it up because I want to tell you about the two threads that I've been able to hang on to and tug on every single day since then. The first one is looking back on my sister Wendy's life. Wendy's relationships were so deep and so meaningful. Her connections to other people were unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. Her cause was so impactful. She reached so many people in those 14 years that she was granted as a transplant recipient. Those 14 years that we traveled the country, I couldn't possibly be prouder of a human being than I was of watching Wendy do her thing and impact people's lives. So I will say this in the broadest sense. Am I a little biased? Yes. But I will tell you, looking back on Wendy's life, her 36 years, she was a woman built for others, a human being built for others, unlike anyone I've ever seen. I don't care if we all live 136 years, we couldn't possibly come close to what Wendy did in her 36. That's my first thread, because as a brother, man, I feel like Wendy's sitting on that left shoulder of mine every single day, and I can tug on that thread and know that she's there, and it gives me great meaning. The second thread is this. It's the vision of my dad, which is clear as can be in my mind's eye, being with us, physically and emotionally present with us in that hospital room right down the road in those final weeks, in ways that I know he never would have been capable of prior to this whole season of life journey. Imagine that, all starting on a high school football field in Baltimore, and being able to process and think through and realize that for us, this was where it all went. I am extremely, extremely proud of the way my dad handled that, and extremely, extremely proud of the father who I have to this day. See, ultimately, Joe Ehrman, he taught me that we never stop learning, even as adults, because we never run out of opportunities to enhance the relationships that mean the most to us. We never run out of chances to impact the lives of others, and we never, ever, ever run out of opportunities to love and to be loved. Again, I asked the question, this is football? Kind of like that same feeling I had that first day I drove up to Gilman in 2001. This is football? Obviously, it's not in a lot of places, and it's not the usual football that we see all the time. Football, the most violent sport in America, the most violent team activity in America, but this is their definition of football, and it's certainly the book, Season of Life. I believe the messages are timeless and universal, and that if you live by the principles in this program, in this book, you'll not only create a wonderful, meaningful, fulfilling life for yourself, but you'll also change, literally change, the world around you. I'm not saying this is easy work. For these last 16 years now since the book came out, I've been doing programs all over the country, a lot of high schools. And one of the first things I hear in high schools is sometimes from a student, sometimes from a coach or a parent, this all sounds really great. Gosh, I wish that we could do that here. It all makes sense, but we just couldn't do it here. It wouldn't fit the culture of our school. That would be impossible. Really? My answer to that is this. You better redefine how you think of the word impossible. And we're going to add that one to our banner. So most people think, and certainly the people that ask those questions in those schools think, that impossible means that which cannot be done. So for example, you can't ever put a guy on the moon, right? Okay, 50 years ago, we kind of checked that one off. That was impossible before they did it. Apartheid in South Africa, never going to end that one. That's just the way things are in South Africa, right? Congratulations, President Mandela. So don't tell me that the impossible is that which cannot be done. The impossible needs to be redefined as simply that which cannot be done until somebody does it. That's the one I want up on our banner of life. And then I want one more word up there so we complete our banner with 5 words today. What does it take to move to that definition of impossible? It often takes great courage. You won't be surprised to hear who I learned from the real definition of courage. It was Wendy. And Wendy taught me that courage is not the absence of fear. It is simply the ability to move forward with dignity in spite of your fear or discomfort. So here's where that leaves us. It leaves us with this imaginary banner waving with 5 words on it, 5 newly defined for the purposes of our time together. Success, coach, greatness, impossible, and courage. And I told you right up front I was going to issue a challenge today, and the challenge is this. I challenge every single person in this room to take that banner home with you, if you will. Add to it whatever the core concepts are that fit your beliefs, and make sure that you have that banner with you, waving it furiously every single day. Doesn't matter if it's a good day or a bad day, you wave your banner. Everywhere you go, doesn't matter if you're at school, on a football field, in church, out, on walking a trail with your family, out in the woods somewhere. It doesn't matter where you are. You wave that banner furiously every single day. And here's my promise to you if you accept that challenge. The question will never be, can you change the world around you? The only question will be, will you choose to do so? Choice. One of the most powerful words in the English language. Will you choose to do so? Thank you very much for letting me be part of this process.
Yeah, we have time for a couple of questions, if that's, and over lunch as well, so.
Tremendous. Any questions? If not, what we do in the schools is we just give a quiz. No. Anybody? Yes.
So, the book mentions Joe kind of losing touch with some of his friends, kind of them just being people to drink with or have a locker next to. How would you recommend building those relationships or finding those relationships where they understand the strategic masculinity and kind of the higher calling that we kind of look for as men?
Right. So for the question for anyone who couldn't hear relates to something Joe talked about in the book where, and that was during his NFL days, he came to realize that a lot of the people that were his so-called friends, his teammates, they really weren't later on. They just kind of lost track of each other and went their own ways. And how do you build those relationships that really matter and they are lasting? And I would say the answer is right in there in his definition, because if you make those things your priority and you find other people and this room is filled with them, that's how you get to where you want to be. You can't just accept what this culture is feeding you every day. You can't. You can't end up where you want to be if you're willing to do that. Anybody else? Great. Thank you very much.